The modern beer industry has been lying to you for decades. They took a drink that sustained entire civilizations for over 1,000 years, that cured disease, that nourished children, that kept workers healthy, even in the most brutal conditions, and turned it into something completely different. And then, to add insult to injury, they started selling back the nutrients they removed in the form of expensive supplements to treat the same health problems their beer caused. Medieval beer was not just an alcoholic drink. It was a complete food, a medicine, a source of safe hydration, and a nutritional pillar that kept entire communities functioning. A medieval peasant who drank beer every day from childhood to old age had stronger bones, a more resilient immune system, and fewer digestive problems than today's average American who drinks processed beer on the weekends. This is not romantic nostalgia. This is documented history, modern science confirming what they've always known, and a truth the billion-dollar beer industry would prefer you never find out. Because if you knew what beer really was before 1886, you would never again buy the soulless yellow liquid they sell today as if it were the same thing. And if you want to continue discovering knowledge that history has buried, subscribe now to Medieval Histories and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another revelation that will completely change how you see the modern world. Because we are only beginning to scratch the surface of what has been stolen from us in the name of profit and convenience. Let's talk about what's happening to you right now, at this very moment, and you probably don't even realize it. 85% of American adults are deficient in B vitamins. 70% have poor gut health, including leaky gut syndrome, a condition that virtually did not exist before 1950. 63% of Americans are overweight or obese, and 42% are considered clinically obese. Type 2 diabetes is at epidemic levels, affecting more than 37 million people in the United States. And meanwhile, the vitamin supplement industry makes over $50 billion a year, selling back the nutrients that have been systematically removed from our food and drink. Have you ever wondered why you need to take a multivitamin every day? Why does your doctor recommend vitamin B supplements? Why have probiotics become this massive industry that didn't exist 30 years ago? The answer lies in what happened to foods and drinks that used to provide these nutrients naturally. And beer is one of the most shocking examples of this transformation. If you're like most Americans, you probably associate beer with beer belly, empty calories, a hangover the next day, and that bloated, lethargic feeling. You were taught that beer makes you fat, that it is just alcohol with carbohydrates, that it has no nutritional value whatsoever. And you know what? For modern beer, this is absolutely correct. But here's what no one tells you. This has nothing to do with beer itself. This has everything to do with what they did to her. Because the beer that a medieval peasant drank for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day of his life was as different from the Budweiser or Miller you buy at the supermarket as a grilled steak is different from a processed McDonald's hamburger. The appearance may be similar, the name may be the same, but nutritionally, biologically, chemically, they are completely different products. And this difference explains why entire societies thrived on drinking beer daily, while today it is considered liquid junk food. Before we dive deeper into this story that will upend everything you thought you knew about beer, leave a comment and tell me, what city, what state, or country are you watching right now? I love knowing where each person in this community comes from, this community of people who are seeking knowledge that has been buried. Leave your location below because what you're about to discover will completely change how you view beer, nutrition, and the food industry for the rest of your life. Seriously, pause for a second and write down where you're watching from, because building this global community of people who question what we've been taught is part of what makes this channel special. And now, let's go back to the year 1238, to a small village in the county of Kent, England, where you are about to witness something that modern industry has tried to erase from history. It's a cold October morning. It's the year 1238, and you're standing inside the brewery of a medieval village about 50 miles south of London, England. The sun has barely started to rise. It is approximately 6 in the morning, and the cold air that enters through the wooden door contrasts with the humid heat emanating from the large fermentation vats. The smell is intense but not unpleasant, a complex combination of roasted grains, wild honey, aromatic herbs, and that distinctive, slightly sour aroma of active fermentation. The stone walls of the brewery are damp with condensation, and in the corner, you can see stacks of bags of malted barley waiting to be used. In the center of the room, a woman named Agnes, who everyone in the village knows simply as Agnes the Brewer, stands on a wooden stool, leaning over an oak tub so large it could easily fit 3 adults inside. His hands are immersed in the thick, dark liquid, stirring with a large wooden spoon that appears to have been passed down for generations. Agnes is approximately 40 years old, with a face marked by the sun and work, calloused and strong hands, and eyes that demonstrate the confidence of someone who learned this trade from her mother, who learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, in an unbroken line that goes back centuries before any written record. She's making beer, but if you expected to see anything resembling the modern industrial process, you'd be completely put off. There are no hops here, because hops will only begin to be widely used in English beer for another 200 years. What Agnes is using is something much more interesting, a complex mixture called Groot, which includes yarrow collected from the nearby hills, mugwort from the monastery garden, juniper berries. She dried herself last summer, fermented oak bark, and a dozen other herbs she keeps secret, each chosen not just for flavor, but for specific medicinal properties. Beside her, in small ceramic pots, are dark wild honey collected from beehives in the forests, live yeast that she keeps active by regularly feeding it rye flour, and what she calls the mother, a thick, viscous liquid full of beneficial bacteria that has been cultivated in this brewery for longer than anyone alive can remember. The process Agnes is carrying out will take approximately 5 days from start to finish, and the result won't be the clear carbonated liquid you'd recognize as modern beer. It will be something closer to a nutritious, slightly effervescent liquid soup, rich in B vitamins, live enzymes, complete proteins, natural probiotics, and a list of nutrients so long it would take an entire page to list. This specific beer that Agnes is making today will be served on the local Lord's table tomorrow night, but a weaker, less expensive version of it will be what feeds the workers in the fields, the children for breakfast, the pregnant women throughout their pregnancy, and literally every person in this village, every day, all year round. And here's the most important part you need to understand. These people aren't drinking for alcoholic pleasure. Agnes is literally producing the premier vehicle of safe nutrition and hydration for the entire community. In a world where water from rivers and wells is often contaminated with parasites and dangerous bacteria, where fresh milk spoils in hours, where there is no refrigeration or way to preserve liquid foods, fermented beer is the answer. The fermentation process kills dangerous pathogens, the herbs add medicinal properties, the malt provides dense calories, and the live microorganisms create a probiotic ecosystem that keeps the digestive system running smoothly. An adult worker in this village will consume approximately 2 to 3 liters of beer per day, starting with a strong, nutritious glass at breakfast, lighter beer throughout the day while working in the fields, and a more substantial beer with the evening meal. Children drink a weaker, less alcoholic version from the age of 4 or 5. Pregnant women are specifically instructed to drink nutrient-rich beer during pregnancy. Sick people are given special medicinal beers made with herbs specific to their conditions. The entire social, nutritional, and economic structure of this community revolves around this fermented drink that Agnes is preparing right now. And if you're thinking, but that must have made everyone drunk all the time, you are completely mistaken. And that is one of the big lies that modern history tells about the medieval period. The beer Agnes is making is approximately 2 to 3% alcohol, less than half the average modern beer. You'd have to drink 5 liters at once to get truly intoxicated. And no one does that because the purpose isn't intoxication, it's nutrition and hydration. This is the reality that modern industry doesn't want you to know. For more than 1,000 years, the main drink of Western civilization was a fermented probiotic superfood that kept entire populations healthy, even in the harshest conditions imaginable. Now, let's talk about the science behind what Agnes is doing and why what happened to beer between 1886 and today is one of the biggest nutritional crimes in modern history. First, you need to understand what actually happens during traditional beer fermentation. When Agnes mixes malted grains, water, honey, and her secret herbs, and then adds live yeast and that mother full of bacteria, she's not just making alcohol. It is orchestrating a complex biochemical transformation where hundreds of different microorganisms work in synergy to break down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars, convert proteins into bioavailable amino acids, synthesize B vitamins from scratch, create digestive enzymes, and establish colonies of probiotic bacteria that will colonize the intestines of those who drink. The malted barley that Agnes uses has gone through a controlled germination process that activates natural enzymes called amylases, which begin to break down starch into sugars. But unlike modern malt, which is processed at high temperatures to speed production and create consistency, Agnes's medieval malt was slowly germinated for days, dried naturally in the sun or near low heat, and keeps all of the grain's original enzymes, vitamins, and minerals intact. When this malt is mixed with hot water, the amylases get to work, but the slow process means you end up with a much wider variety of sugars, not just the simple sugar that modern yeast is genetically engineered to consume. This variety of sugars feeds a much greater diversity of microorganisms, creating a complex probiotic ecosystem rather than a monoculture. And here's where it gets really interesting. The herbs Agnes adds aren't just for flavor. Yarrow contains anti-inflammatory compounds and promotes digestive health. Artemisia has antiparasitic properties and helps eliminate intestinal worms, a common problem in medieval times. Juniper berries are rich in antioxidants and have antibacterial effects. Fermented oak bark provides tannins that help preserve beer naturally and has astringent properties that fight infection. Each herb has been chosen through centuries of trial and error to contribute not just flavor, but specific health benefits. And then there's that mysterious mother that Agnes guards so carefully. Researchers at Stanford University in 2017 did something fascinating. They analyzed medieval beer residue found in ceramic jars in England and managed to grow some of the bacteria that were still viable after 700 years. What they found was shocking. More than 200 different strains of lactic acid bacteria and wild yeast, many of which no longer exist anywhere else in the world because they have been completely eliminated from modern production chains. These bacteria produce organic acids that lower the beer's pH, making it inhospitable to dangerous pathogens, but perfect for beneficial bacteria. They synthesize B vitamins in such high quantities that a single mug of medieval beer provided 100% of the daily need for thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, pyridoxine, and biotin. They produce bacteriocins, which are natural antibiotics that fight infections without destroying beneficial intestinal flora. And here's the most impressive thing. They partially digest grain proteins, creating bioactive peptides that have direct effects on the immune system, mood, and brain function. Researchers at the University of Cork in Ireland in 2019 compared samples of beer made using traditional medieval methods with modern industrial beer, and the results were devastating for the modern industry. Medieval beer contained 14 times more B vitamins, 23 times more viable probiotics, had a 60% lower glycemic index despite containing more total carbohydrates, and produced an immune response measured through markers of inflammation that was 95% better. People who drank medieval beer experienced increased antibody production, reduced markers of systemic inflammation, and improved intestinal barrier function. Meanwhile, people who drank modern beer showed increases in inflammatory markers, damage to the intestinal barrier, and blood sugar spikes followed by crashes that left people hungry and tired. The difference is not subtle. It's dramatic. It's the difference between a complete food that nourishes and heals and an industrial product that provides empty calories and causes inflammation. But here's the part that will make you understand why this is so important. The medieval fermentation process wasn't just about creating alcohol. It was about biopreservation, bioavailability, and biofortification. Biopreservation means that the beneficial microorganisms and the acids they produce preserve the drink naturally, allowing it to last for weeks or months without refrigeration, without pasteurization, without chemical additives. Bioavailability means that the fermentation process breaks down nutrients into forms that the human body can absorb much more easily, making a mug of medieval ale nutritionally more valuable than eating the same grains raw or cooked. Biofortification means that microorganisms actually create nutrients that were not present in the original ingredients, synthesizing vitamins and bioactive compounds during the fermentation process. Medieval beer was, in modern terms, a multi-strain fermented probiotic food, biofortified with B vitamins, rich in digestive enzymes, with anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory properties, and a low glycemic index despite its carbohydrate content. If someone released this today as a new superfood, it would be sold in health food stores for $20 a pint and promoted as the next big thing in functional nutrition. Except it's not a discovery. It's what every grandmother in medieval Europe knew how to do at home. So what happened? How did we go from a drink that nourished entire civilizations to the industrialized liquid that Americans drink by the billions of liters every year? The answer has a very specific date, a very identifiable villain, and a very clear motivation: profit above all. In 1886, a French chemist named Louis Pasteur convinced the European brewing industry to adopt a process he had developed called pasteurization. The promise was simple. By heating beer to 80 degrees Celsius for 15 to 30 minutes, you could kill all the bacteria and yeast, making the product stable for much longer, more consistent in flavor, and easier to transport long distances without spoiling. For the industry, this was magic. It meant they could produce in a centralized factory and ship across the country or world without worrying about variations or spoilage. It meant every bottle would be exactly the same, creating brand consistency. It meant longer shelf life, less losses, more profit. What they didn't say, or didn't care, is that this heating process kills absolutely everything that made medieval beer nutritious. All probiotic, dead. All enzyme, denatured and inactive. Many vitamins, especially heat-sensitive ones like thiamine and riboflavin, are destroyed or drastically reduced. Bioactive compounds from herbs, degraded. The living ecosystem that made beer a complete food, exterminated. What's left is essentially water with alcohol and carbohydrates, as nutritionally dead as soda. But pasteurization was just the beginning of the betrayal. Soon after came the switch to pure commercial yeasts. For thousands of years, beer was made with a complex mixture of wild yeast and bacteria that lived in the brewery environment, passed from batch to batch. Each brewery had its own unique collection of microorganisms, developed over generations. But modern industry decided this was inefficient and unpredictable. So they developed unique strains of yeast isolated in the laboratory, genetically selected to ferment quickly, produce high levels of alcohol, and die quickly afterwards. These commercial yeasts, like the famous Saccharomyces cerevisiae lager strain that dominates the industry today, are essentially monocultures. They produce alcohol efficiently, but do not create the diversity of compounds that wild yeast and bacteria produce. They do not synthesize the same vitamins. They do not produce the same bioactive peptides. And they definitely don't create the complex probiotic ecosystem that kept medieval intestines healthy. And then came the final blow, the German purity law of 1516, known as the Reinheitsgebot, which has been resurrected and romanticized by modern industry as if it were a good thing. This law decreed that beer could only be made with water, barley, and hops, period. Nothing else allowed. Sounds noble, right? Purity? In reality, it was one of the greatest destructions of nutritional knowledge. Al of the story. This law eliminated literally hundreds of traditional ingredients that had been used in beer for over 1,000 years. All medicinal herbs eliminated. The honey that added nutrients and fed different probiotics eliminated. Alternative grains like rye, oats, and wheat that added nutritional variety were severely restricted. And what's worse, the hops that were imposed as the sole bittering and preserving agent are much less nutritious and have much fewer medicinal properties than the complex mixture of herbs it replaced. Hops are good, don't get me wrong, but they're just a plant. The medieval Groot mixture was 10, 15, sometimes 20 different plants, each chosen by centuries of empirical wisdom for its specific properties. Trading that for pure hops was like trading a whole pharmacy for a single medicine. But the real motive behind Reinheitsgebot had nothing to do with purity or quality. It was control and imposed. The ingredients allowed by law were those that the government could easily tax and control. Grain could be measured and taxed. Hops could be grown on controlled farms and taxed. But wild herbs collected in forests, honey from wild hives, how do you tax this? How do you control this? The answer, you can't, so you forbid it. You call it unclean. You create a narrative where simplicity equals quality, and then you profit from the monopoly. And today, the $680 billion global beer industry loves to talk about the Reinheitsgebot as if it were a mark of quality, when in reality it was the legislative tool that allowed the destruction of ancient nutritional knowledge in favor of corporate profit. They know exactly what they did. They know that the beer they sell today has no relationship to the food that sustained European civilization. And not only do they not care, they actively perpetuate the lie. They see you buying probiotics at the drugstore for $30 a box, trying to fix your broken gut. And they know that the drink their great-grandparents made at home provided those probiotics naturally. They see you taking a B complex every morning because you're always tired. And they know that a mug of medieval ale would provide that. They see you struggling with inflammation, irritable bowel syndrome, food allergies, and they know that the microbial ecosystem that traditional beer created protected against all of that. And what do? They release probiotic and functional products that are just industrial beer with some dead probiotics added at the end, sell it for twice the price, and laugh all the way to the bank while you continue to get sick. The good news is that this knowledge wasn't lost completely. It was just buried. And you can start reclaiming it today, right now, without having to move to a medieval village or learn how to make beer from scratch. Although if you want to do that, it's absolutely possible, and there are entire communities online dedicated to resurrecting historic brewing methods. But let's start with practical steps that anyone can take right away. First, you need to learn to identify the difference between dead beer and live beer. When you're in the supermarket looking at the beer section, 99% of what you see is pasteurized, made with pure commercial yeast, and is nutritionally dead. But there is that 1% who is different, and you can identify them. Look for the words unpasteurized or unpasteurized on the label. Look for bottle re-fermented or bottle conditioned, which means there is live yeast still in the bottle. Look for beers made by small craft breweries that specifically mention using wild yeast or lactic acid bacteria. And here's a simple test you can do right now. Take a regular industrial beer, a Budweiser or Coors or any macro beer, and put it outside the fridge for a week. She won't change anything at all. It will remain exactly the same because it is completely dead, sterilized, preserved with chemicals. Now take an unpasteurized craft beer re-fermented in the bottle and do the same. After a week, you will notice changes. The flavor will evolve. It might be a little more sour, a little more complex. May develop more carbonation. This is not deterioration, this is life. These are still active microorganisms doing their work. That's what you want. Second, if you really want to try something close to medieval beer, look for historic styles that are being resurrected by specialty breweries. Farmhouse beers, especially traditional Belgian saisons, are made with methods that preserve much of the medieval wisdom. Sour beers, or sour beers, especially styles like Berliner Weisse or Gose, use lactic acid bacteria in addition to yeast and create that complex probiotic ecosystem. Grut or Groot beers, which are hop-free beers made with historic herb blends, are having a small renaissance in historically conscious craft breweries. And if you find breweries that make beer with mixed culture or mixed fermentation, where they intentionally use multiple strains of yeast and bacteria, you're finding someone who understands what beer used to be. Third, and this is important, change your mindset about what beer is. Stop thinking of it as an alcoholic drink for weekends or celebrations, and start thinking of it as the fermented food that our ancestors consumed daily for nutritional reasons. This doesn't mean you should drink 3 liters a day like a medieval peasant did, because the context is different. You have access to clean water and other sources of nutrition that they didn't have. But it does mean that a truly traditional, unpasteurized pint of beer, full of live probiotics, taken with a meal, is not junk food, it is functional food. And you should choose it as carefully as you choose probiotic yogurt or fermented vegetables. Look at the ingredients. If you see a giant list of chemicals, pass by. If you only see water, malt, hops, and yeast, and the beer is unpasteurized, you're on the right track. And if you see additional ingredients like fruits, herbs, spices, or alternative grains, and the brewery clearly understands what they're doing, you may have found something special. Fourth, consider learning how to make your own beer at home. And before you think this is too complicated or too expensive, let me tell you, making basic beer is easier than making bread. You need a 20-gallon food-grade plastic bucket that costs $10, a fermenter that costs $15, basic ingredients that cost $30 to $40 per batch, and make approximately 20 liters of beer. And time, approximately 4 hours of actual labor spread over 3 to 4 weeks. There are complete beginner kits that come with everything you need and step-by-step instructions. And once you've mastered the basics, you can start experimenting with historical ingredients, adding medicinal herbs, working with wild yeast, and literally recreating what Agnes was doing in 1238. There are entire communities online, like the R Homebrewing subreddit or forums like Homebrew Talk, where people share historic recipes, traditional techniques, and support for beginners. And here's the best part. Once you make your own beer and taste the difference, you'll never want to go back to that soulless, yellow industrial liquid. This knowledge was not lost, it was just buried. And every time you choose unpasteurized beer made with traditional methods over industrial produce, every time you question why you need supplements to replace nutrients that used to be naturally in your food and drink, every time you choose to support small craft breweries that respect history and tradition rather than corporate conglomerates that maximize profit at the expense of your health, you are reclaiming wisdom that kept generations healthy when life was much harder. If this video opened your eyes to what the industry hides, press that like button below. It really helps the channel to continue bringing these truths that few have the courage to tell. And if you're not already subscribed, sign up now for Medieval Histories and hit that notification bell, because every week we're unearthing more knowledge they'd rather you never discovered, from how real food used to be made, to medicinal practices that worked better than modern medicine, to building techniques that lasted 1,000 years while modern houses crumble in 50. We are building a community of people who refuse to accept that newer automatically means better, who recognize that our ancestors were not ignorant primitives, but intelligent people who solved complex problems with elegant solutions that worked. See you in the next video, where we'll talk about another medieval secret that modern industry doesn't want you to know.